Hello and welcome to We Draw More. This is episode 1 of Trade Secrets, the bi-weekly podcast where I get to discuss all things related to Magic the Gathering. Let's start with the question, why trade secrets? Because if you're coming on this podcast journey with me and you're going to tune in regularly, maybe it will help you to know where it started from. The last name I had, and the name that was set in stone for the podcast right up until the last minute, was the stack. In fact, the file I created to generate the imagery for this podcast is actually called The Stack Ep1. Before that, the name for the podcast I had in my head was Phil's Pondering Podcast, because I liked the alliteration and I also liked the reference to a magic card. And it was from there that I had eventually settled on the stack being more a term about the interaction of spells during the game. But I kept coming back to the issue that I was struggling to reconcile how the name The Stack related to the topics of the podcast, namely current topics being discussed in the world of Magic the Gathering. So I went back to the drawing board and I thought, well, if I'm going to name the podcast after maybe a magic card, then where should I start looking? And my first thought was, well, Ristic Study was a particularly good card. So I went on to Scryfall and I started looking for cards named Study. And one of the cards I found was the Study Hall. And I actually quite liked this, and for a while it was actually the name I was going to call the podcast. I thought to myself, well, do I really want to call it the study hall? Does that more resemble something to do with university studying or something along those lines? And so I thought to myself, well, I'm going to keep looking. So I was thinking about this and I was thinking to myself, well, what names of magic cards do I think are a cool sounding podcast name? And one of those that sprung to mind was Delver of Secrets. I like the imagery that the name Delver of Secrets comes up with. So I thought to myself, well, let's have a look at what other cards with the name Secret are actually in Magic the Gathering. And there's quite a few, and some really stood out to me. Herald of Secret Streams, I thought that was quite a cool name, but I thought it was quite wordy. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. Could have called the podcast Unraveler of Secrets to just ape off of Jace cards, but I didn't like that, and I don't like Jace either, quite frankly. So we moved on. And then we got to Keeper of Secrets. Keeper of Secrets is a Slaneshi Warhammer demon, and so if I called my podcast Keeper of Secrets, I think it would appeal more to Warhammer people until they realised it was about magic than it would to magic people. And so I kept on searching, and there's quite a lot of cards with the word secret in their titles, and right at the bottom of the list, almost the last card I came to on Scryfall was Trade Secrets. And Trade Secrets appealed to me because the name of the channel is We Draw More. And what Trade Secrets allows you to do is draw a lot of cards, especially if you're in cahoots with another player when you're playing Magic, because they get to draw 2 and then you get to draw 4. And then, if they want to, they can repeat that process. So they can draw another 2 and you'll get to draw another 4. So when it comes to drawing more cards, like the name of the channel, Trade Secrets is probably the best card out there. So I felt it actually resonated the name of the channel. It also answered my needs to name the podcast after a magic card. And so Trade Secrets it is. The most recent topic of discussion appears to be hybrid mana. There are new end of people posting videos on the internet about hybrid mana. Poor Joey from IndieH Rec, he's posted too. Some of them are fans, some of them are not fans, on WotC's proposed changes to hybrid mana. What is hybrid mana? What are the current rules for it? And what is WotC suggesting it is changed to? Under the current rules, in a commander format, card's colour identity is determined by all the small mana symbols on the card, including those symbols in its casting cost and rules text. Currently, hybrid mana symbols, such as the one showed here, which are green and white, which is known as Selesnya, are treated as both colours, meaning that a card like Reese the Redeemed is considered to be both green and white, and is therefore restricted in its use to decks that include both colours. That limits its playability and prevents it being played in monocoloured decks. What they are proposing to do is to allow hybrid mana symbols to be treated as either colour. So, for example, Reese the Redeemed could be played in a mono green deck, like Azuri in an Elf Ball deck, or it could be played in a mono white deck, such as Mondrak or Dominus in a white tokens deck, rather than being restricted to playing decks that are playing at least green, white, if not other colours as well. So that change could significantly increase the number of playable cards in mono and dual colour decks. What it wouldn't change is for cards like Selesnya Guildmage, which has 2 Selesnya as its casting cost, but it also has green mana symbols and white mana symbols in its rules text, and thus Selesnya Guildmage, for the purposes of deck building, is a green-white card and needs to be played in decks where the commander has at least green-white in its casting cost. It also doesn't change the rules when you're actually playing game. So for the purposes of playing the game, a card like Reese the Redeemed is still both green and white, even if you're playing it in a mono white deck. So a card like Ether Gust can still be cast at Reese the Redeemed because Reese the Redeemed is both green and white. Overall, I don't think this is a bad change. However, I have some issues with the way this has been presented and the way I think it's going to go further down the line. So for starters, I believe that there are cards that have hybrid mana costs which are very specifically designed to be played in decks playing both colours. Deathbringer Leech is a really good example of this. It's 2 colourless and then 3 Orzhov hybrid mana, which is white, black, white, black, white, black. And it's a horror with a 3/4 body, and it has other white creatures you control get +1/+1, and other black creatures you control get +1/+1. And whenever you cast a white spell, you may tap target creature. And whenever you cast a black spell, you may destroy target creature if it's tapped. Where this works best is if you are casting a spell that is both black and white, you can choose which order those 2 triggered abilities go on a stack. So you can choose the white one to go on the stack last so that it resolves first. That will let you tap a target creature. Then the black triggered ability will trigger, and that will let you destroy that tapped creature, or any other tapped creature if you choose to target someone different. Yes, you could play it in a mono white deck. It's just a +1/+1 anthem, and there are cheaper ways of doing that. And you get to tap creatures when you cast white spells. Not that powerful. Could you play it in a mono black deck? Yes, you probably could. Slightly more powerful in a black deck because not only do you get the anthem, but every time you cast a black spell, you get to kill a tapped creature. Every time you cast a black spell, you get to kill a tapped creature. So I do think this could be played in mono black. I don't think it would be played in mono white, but I think its best home is in a deck that is playing both black and white. Probably a pure Orzhov deck with someone like Shay Cormac as the commander. Shay Cormac is white-black and is a 1/1 human knight rogue, but they have 1 permanents your opponents control lose hexproof, indestructible, protection, shroud, and ward until end of turn. And Shay Cormac also says whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes a target of a spell or ability you control, put a bounty counter on that creature. You're actually targeting it with 2 abilities. And then it says whenever a creature with a bounty counter on it dies, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Shay Cormac. So you're targeting it with the liege, you're killing it with the liege, so you're putting counters onto Shay Cormac, and Shay Cormac can also get rid of anything that might be able to stop you doing that. Perfect cards in a Shay Cormac deck. So that's Deathbringer Liege. Another card, I think, highlights the fact that certain cards are given hybrid mana and are designed to be played in decks of both colours is Steel of the Godhead. Steel of the Godhead is 2 an Azorius, which is white-blue, and is an aura, and it has Enchant Creature. As long as Enchanted Creature is white, it gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. As long as Enchanted Creature is blue, it gets +1/+1 and is unblockable. Where do I think this would be played? In a deck that would take the most advantage out of the fact that you could play this on a creature that is at least white and blue, and so it gets +2/+2, it gets lifelink, and it becomes unblockable. Would I see this being played in a mono white, say, life gain deck? Well, there are 180 creatures or so that are mono white and either have lifelink or give creatures lifelink. Would you need to play this as well? I sincerely doubt it. Would I see this being played in mono blue? Mono blue already has creatures that are unblockable. I don't see that you actually need to give creatures unblockable. There are places where maybe a Dimir Ninjutsu deck where you might want to give a creature unblockable so you can trigger Ninjutsu, but that's a 3 mana 1 use card to give something unblockable to swap it out with a Ninjutsu creature. Not very efficient. Where I think you would be playing this at the moment is in Bruna Light of Alabaster, which is 3 white, white, blue for a 5/5 angel, flying vigilance, and it has whenever Bruna Light of Alabaster attacks or blocks, you may attach to it any number of auras on the battlefield, and you may put onto the battlefield attached to it any number of aura cards that could enchant it from your graveyard and or hand. Wizards really have a way of writing really long sentences on their cards. They should get somebody to read them more often. In this case, Still the Godhead is an aura, so when you attack with Bruna, you can either move it onto Bruna if it's on the battlefield, or you can take it out of your hand and actually put it onto Bruna as it's attacking. It would give Bruna lifelink, unblockable, flying, vigilance, and it would be 7/7. Quite frankly, I think that's a really good way of going down a Voltron Bruna build. Another place where it's a heavily played card is Rafik of the Many. Rafik of the Many is 1 and Bant, I think that is, which is green, white, blue. They're a 3/3 human knight, and they have Exalted. When they're a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. So if you had a creature that was enchanted with Still the Godhead, it would be getting +2/+2 if it was both blue and white. It would be getting lifelink, it would be getting unblockable, and if it attacked alone, it would get an extra +1/+1, and it would get double strike, which would give you 2 lifelink triggers as well. So if you could find more ways to do similar, you could build quite a strong life gain Rafik of the Many Exalted deck. Where you could play it, based on the change that they're proposing, is in Sithis Harvest Sand. Sithis Harvest Sand is a Selesnya deck, so it's green-white, but because Still the Godhead would be considered mono-white, you could put it in Sithis. Sithis simply has whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. Sithis is the classic commander for an Enchantress life gain deck, and the lifelink ability, Still the Godhead, would fit into that, and it is an enchantment, so you do get to draw a card to replace it, but you wouldn't get the blue unblockable ability in that deck, so I don't see why you would play it in something that isn't playing blue. Olivia of the Wild Court would really benefit if you could play blue in Elevere. Elevere is 2 colourless and Selesnya and is a 4/4 human knight. And if we ignore the first part of her text and focus on the bottom part, it says whenever enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Well, if you were able to play blue in such a deck, and we could have Steel of the Godhead on a blue card and it was unblockable, then we could guarantee drawing a card. Unfortunately, that's not how it's going to work. Yes, you could play Steel of the Godhead in this deck, but you wouldn't because you're not getting half of the abilities. Steel of the Godhead wants to go in a deck where you're playing blue and white. From what I understand, new players can find it confusing where you have cards who have one colour in their casting cost and then have hybrid mana in their rules text. Alicia, who smiles at death, is a classic example of that. She is 2 and red. In fact, she's a red bordered card, so she looks like she's just red. But in her rules text, she has 2 Orzhov hybrid mana symbols. So Alicia is actually a Mardu card, and that, I understand, is complicated enough for new players to understand. If you then have to tell them, actually, she could be Boros, or she could be Rakdos, or she could be Mardu, and you have to explain to her that she can be counted as being red, white, white, or red, black, black, or red, white, black. That, I think, is more complicated, and I think that presents an increased barrier to entry for new players to understand more complicated mana cost, and makes deck building for those players more complicated. For players who have been playing Commander for a long time, I think it opens up deck building opportunities. So the question is, do we want to make the game of Magic more complicated for new players? New players are most likely to pick up a precon, but then when it comes to deck building, when it comes to moving on to actually trying to build their own deck to change their decks, then they're going to encounter cards that have complicated rules around their mana values, both in the game and in deck building. And I don't think we want to go down that route. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit further. So let's look at Ginny Fey, Jet Me a Second. Ginny Fey, Jet Me a Second has a Gruul hybrid mana symbol, it has a mono green symbol, and then it has a Selesnya symbol. So at the moment, it is Naya, which is red, green, white. So you can't play it in a mono green deck, you can't play it in a Gruul deck, and you can't play it in a Selesnya deck. If the ruling was to be changed, then you could play it in a Gruul deck because it would be seen as being red, green, green, or you could play it in a mono green deck because it would be seen as being green, 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 or it would be seen as being a Selesnya card, which would be green, green, white. Would you want to play it in any of those decks? In particular, you wouldn't want to play Ginny Fey mono green, I don't think. What Ginny Fey does is converts your tokens into either 2/2 cats or 3/1 dogs. If you're playing tokens in mono green, I would wager you're probably playing squirrels or you're playing saplings. Would you want your tokens, which you may want to be doing things with, you'll have cards that recognise squirrels or saplings or those sorts of things. Would you want them to be cats? Would you want them to be dogs? I don't think you would. I think you wouldn't want to put it into a Gruul deck because I don't think it's aggressive enough. Would it find home in a Selesnya populate deck, as in a token generation deck, possibly, or maybe a fun deck, possibly, but I'm putting this one out there in this video because I think it's just an example of where the hybrid mana costs are just getting ever so slightly more complicated, but they get more complicated than this still. Kin-Tree Severance is a completely different case, actually. Kin-Tree Severance, I think, just busts the mana pie. So what we've got with Kin-Tree Severance, I'm not even sure you would class it as hybrid mana, but you've got 2 colours and white, you've got 2 colours and black, and you've got 2 colourless and green. Would this be playable in a colourless deck? Exile target permanent with mana value of 3 or greater? I don't know. Would it be playable in mono white, so you'd have white or colourless? Or mono black, which is black and 4 colourless, or equally mono green. So you'd have 4 colourless and mono green, or you could play it in Golgari, or you could play it in Selesnya, or you could play it in Orzhov. Not just Abzan, as it is currently. Kin-Tree Severance is effectively just a slightly more expensive D-Spark, which is an Orzhov card. And in fact, we find exile target permanent more often on Orzhov cards than we do on any other type of card. Mono white can exile stuff, but it does it temporarily, usually until the permanent that's doing the exiling is removed from play. Mono green doesn't get to exile target permanent. Mono black doesn't get to exile target permanent. Selesnya doesn't get to exile target permanents. Golgari doesn't get to exile target permanents. Orzhov does. And in this case, Abzan does. But if we do the hybrid mana change, then is this card then able to be played in those different colour combinations? And if so, would it see more play? Probably it would, I think. Particularly, for example, in black. Given black the ability to just straight up exile target permanent with mana value 3 or greater, I think it's very powerful. Black has great ways of producing lots of mana, so does white, so does green as it happens. I don't think the casting cost is prohibitive, and I think the ability to exile 8 permanent, it could be their commander, so it could be a creature, it could be an artifact, it could be an enchantment, it could be a planeswalker, it could be a battle, it could be a land, it could be any of those things, and we don't generally see that ability outside of Orzhov. If I take a step back, and we go back to complicated mana cost, Then the ultimate card for having a complicated mana cost is Leyline of the Guild Pact. Leyline of the Guild Pact is currently seen as being all 5 colours, so that's white, blue, black, red, green, or Wooberg as they call it. If we change the rules to how we build our decks, Leyline of the Guild Pact can be played in all 5 colours. It can be played in all 4 mana colour combinations. It can be played in mono green. It can be played in Gruul, Golgari, Simic, and Selesnya. It can also be played in many different triple colour combinations, provided in that triple colour combination you have green, like for example in Naya, so red, green, white. Would it be played in any of those colour combinations? I'm not entirely sure. Would I play it in a bracket 2 or low bracket 3-4 colour deck? Yes, I probably would. The chance to get this in your opening hand, put it into play so that it really does mana fix for you, I think is pretty good. And in fact, it's seen as one of the strongest hybrid mana cards out there. I think it's in the top 10 of one particular website I looked at earlier, so it must have playability. When you start going down the colour combinations though, its playability gets less. Do you want to play it in a 2 colour deck? Probably not. Do you want to play it in a 1 colour deck? Absolutely not. 3 colours? Possibly. You're playing green, so maybe you wouldn't go down that route at all. But what it does, it exemplifies the way in which hybrid mana can become quite complicated. And if Wizards are going to open up this design space, which is what I think they intend to do, I don't think this change is for the players. I can't see the players are clamoring for this change. I think Wizards want to change this so that they can open up design space. I think if they're going to open up the design space in future sets, then I think we're going to see more and more complicated hybrid mana casting costs. And we've already seen it with cards like Leyline, and also with cards, for example, like Tamiyo. Tamiyo Completed Sage wouldn't be affected by this change, but it's a really good example of where we've got yet another different type of hybrid mana. In this case, we've got Phyrexian mana. You can either cast Tamiyo with 2 green, green, blue, or 2 green, blue, blue, or you can cast it for 2 green, blue, and pay 2 life. So we've seen where we've got colourless mana as part of hybrid mana costs, where we've got multiple different versions of hybrid mana costs, and now we've got paying hybrid mana costs or paying life with Phyrexian mana. And I think if Wizards are looking at this design space, and that's why they want to make the change, we are going to go down the route where the deck building rules become more complicated because of the casting costs of the cards, and I don't think that's a particularly good change for the game. I think they can already be complicated enough. I think new players already have enough to try and learn, and we don't need to be changing this right here, right now. Well, that's my thoughts on the hybrid mana change. I'm kind of for it, but I see problems coming in the future. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on the hybrid mana change. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Why do you think it's bad? Or why do you think it's good? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications when I release future videos.